Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma, Chapter 12, Devadatta. So far we have read how Shakyamuni directly assured the Buddhahood of many of his disciples. All of them, however, were men who, because they were the Buddha's immediate disciples, who benefited from his direct guidance, had developed the iron will to devote themselves wholly to religious practice. Were it true that only people such as these male disciples of the Buddha could attain supreme perfect awakening, the foundational principle that all beings possess Buddha nature would be placed in doubt. In this chapter, however, the Buddha reveals the scope and comprehensiveness of his teaching by demonstrating the attainment of Buddhahood by women and also by people whose actions are evil. The monk Devadatta, after whom this chapter is named, was Shakyamuni's cousin. As stories of the Buddha's life illustrate, despite being a relative, Devadatta was extremely different from Shakyamuni, possessing a heart of overwhelming cruelty. He became jealous that so many people revered Shakyamuni as a Buddha and adored him. Ambitious to displace the Buddha, Devadatta not only tried to frame the Buddha by slandering him, but also used various methods in several attempts on Shakyamuni's life. On one occasion, Devadatta rolled a boulder down a road when the Buddha was passing. Another time, he got an elephant drunk so that it would run wild and trample the Buddha. Once Devadatta slipped Shakyamuni poison. On another occasion, he shot the Buddha with a bow and arrow. The fact that Shakyamuni assures the Buddhahood of this Devadatta, the person whose name topped the list of his enemies, is a demonstration of his perfect forbearance, deepest compassion, and unqualified reverence for the inherent dignity of all human life. The other defining feature of this chapter is Shakyamuni Buddha's grant of an assurance of Buddhahood to the daughter of a dragon king, a girl just 8 years old. People today might find it preposterous that this chapter discusses the Buddhahood of women and the Buddhahood of evil people in the same breath. But in India, during the time of the Buddha, women were generally considered to be the very incarnation of immorality, regarded as hindrances to men's cultivation of religious practice, and so they were deemed beyond liberation. Ancient Indian society was also highly stratified, divided into 4 hereditary social groups called varnas, also referred to as castes. First came the Brahmins, a priestly caste specializing in religious knowledge and rites, and charged with exemplifying virtue. The second was the Kshatriyas, an aristocratic class from which kings and warriors were derived. The third was the Vaishyas, a class of peasants, artisans, and merchants. Below these 3 came the Shudras, a social order of manual laborers. This system maintained rigid distinctions based on birth, and no matter how brilliant, a person could never rise to a higher varna. If a person was born a Shudra, they were destined to remain so until the end of their life. On the other hand, a person born to a Brahmin family, even one with no talent at all, could live out their life socially ranked above others. A person who is a Kshatriya warrior by birth possessed the right to hold enormous power, even if the person was a coward. Vaishyas used the power afforded by their wealth to collude with the Brahmins and ingratiate themselves with the Kshatriyas, while wielding another kind of authority over the Shudras, working them as if they were beasts of burden. The overwhelming majority of the population belonged to the Shudra Varna, but since the Shudras were barely treated as human beings, the upper 3 Varnas dominated the world of ancient India. In such a hierarchical society, the Buddha's assertion that all people are equal amounted to a revolutionary declaration more radical than we can even imagine today. And as we would expect, there was a strong pushback from the classes that held the reins of power. In spite of this opposition, Shakyamuni Buddha, who patiently endured all persecutions, taught the principle of human equality that is encompassed by the Lotus Sutra with great courage and an indomitable spirit. His repeated discussions of the difficulty of receiving and embracing as well as promulgating the Lotus Sutra are a reflection of social conditions in the India of his time. The Buddha's declaration of women's ability to become Buddhas must also be understood in terms of the social conditions and general attitudes of the Buddha's time. As discussed above, in an age when women were considered inherently immoral, the Buddha declared, "Women can become Buddhas too. In essence, there is no distinction between the sexes. All human beings are equal." This was indeed a grand proclamation of epoch-making proportions. Since the French Revolution of 1789, the concept of human equality has taken root in people's psyches, promoting the development of the ideal of the democratic society. More than 2,000 years earlier, however, Shakyamuni Buddha taught a notion of equality that was far more profound than that of modern times. Unfortunately, people in the centuries after his passing were unable to accept this teaching, or lacked the ability to spread it successfully. Buddhists owe those of the past ages many apologies for the long delay in realizing Shakyamuni Buddha's ideal of human equality. With this preliminary discussion in mind, let us proceed. As with previous chapters, I will sketch a general outline of the text, exploring the most important points in greater detail. The Buddha begins by addressing the bodhisattvas, the heavenly beings, and the four groups, monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, telling them a story about the relationship between himself in a previous life and a certain hermit. In many previous lives, I took the form of a king who vowed to attain the highest awakening of supreme wisdom, and desiring to complete the 6 paramitas, I diligently undertook the practice of donation in order to serve others. I donated all my riches, cities, and members of my family, even sacrificed my own body with no regrets whatsoever. Finally, I gave up the throne, turning over government to the crown prince, and I searched in every direction for a teacher, proclaiming, "Until the end of my days, I will serve whomever can teach me the great vehicle." At that time, a mountain hermit called Asita came to me and said, "As long as you serve me by doing as I say, I will give you the most supreme teaching of the great vehicle, which is called the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma." Immediately I was delighted to become the hermit's servant, providing for all his needs by gathering fruit, drawing water, collecting firewood, preparing his food, and performing all the chores of daily life. When my master grew tired and had no place to sit, I lay face down on the ground to become his seat or bed. I served him in this way for more than 1,000 years. I took great joy in the Dharma that he taught me, and I was tirelessly attentive to his needs and saw to them so that he lacked nothing. All this I did because of my desire to liberate all living beings from suffering. After telling this story to the assembly, Shakyamuni Buddha declares that the king was he himself in a former life, and he also makes the shocking revelation that this hermit, Asita, was the previous life of Devadatta. Furthermore, the Buddha gives an assurance that after innumerable kalpas of practice, Devadatta will also become a Buddha. Even those whose actions are evil can become Buddhas. It would be dangerous to understand superficially the Buddha's declaration that even Devadatta, who tried to murder him, would become a Buddha. We must not forget that Devadatta's attainment of Buddhahood is premised on the condition that he frees his mind from delusion and practices spiritual disciplines. Any evil person invariably possesses Buddha nature, so if they encounter the Dharma and it sweeps away the dark clouds of delusion obscuring their mind, their true self, their Buddha nature, will begin to shine radiantly. The fact that Shakyamuni Buddha so explicitly taught, here in this chapter, that people whose actions are evil can become Buddhas, brings great relief to people living in the age of the decline of the Dharma. Opposition and adversity become conditions for attaining Buddhahood. In addition to Shakyamuni Buddha's declaration that evil people can also become Buddhas, this section of the chapter includes 2 more teachings. One is that no matter the opposition and adversity we experience, if we face them with forbearance and patience and continue to practice our spiritual disciplines, opposition and adversity become conditions, opportunities that function as secondary causes for our attainment of Buddhahood. When, in the text of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha says, "I attained perfect awakening and extensively liberated living beings. All of this is due to the good friendship of Devadatta." He is saying that he attained the awakening of a Buddha and became able to lead all living beings to liberation because of his good friend Devadatta. This is an extremely important statement by the Buddha. When we meet with people's ridicule, abuse, and interference, we tend to become angry or feel miserable and begin to have doubts about the Dharma. But since the teaching of the Lotus Sutra is indisputably the most supreme Dharma in our world, we can endure such hardships and by doing so, change their negative energy into positive forces. Many teachers and religious leaders of the past, including both Shakyamuni and Nichiren, serve as concrete exemplars who turn drawbacks into advantages and negatives into positives, which indeed we can do also. Refrain from repaying hatred with hatred. In the other teaching in this section, we learn that we must not repay hatred with hatred. Not only did Shakyamuni Buddha feel no resentment towards Devadatta, who tormented him so, but he was even thankful to Devadatta for being a good friend. Some people may feel that such an attitude could never work in the fiercely competitive struggle that daily life has become in recent years. Let me offer one striking example, however, that validates the Buddha's thinking. At the plenary session of the San Francisco Peace Treaty Conference held in 1951 to negotiate a final treaty of peace ending the bitter conflict of the Second World War in the Pacific, J.R. Jayewardene, the Ceylonese finance minister and chief Ceylonese delegate, made a speech declaring that Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka, had no intention of seeking reparations from Japan. Jayewardene quoted the following words of the Buddha from the Dhammapada: "Through hatred, hatred is never appeased. Only through compassion can hatred be appeased. This is ancient law." Jaywardene's speech is reported to have drawn thunderous applause. Countries often interact with each other by using threats or deception, enticing each other's citizens to work as double agents, or betraying allies at the last moment. From the standpoint of personal relationships, international relations can be utterly deplorable at times. This is why Sri Lanka's adoption of the Buddha's teachings as its foreign policy on such a high-profile diplomatic stage is all the more impressive. Moreover, the fact that Jaywardene's speech moved the other delegates to respond with celebratory applause also demonstrates that a path still remains for humankind to save itself, filling our hearts with great hope for the future of the human race. Indeed, if we return others' hostility with our own, their bitterness towards us will only increase. Thus, hatred will beget more hatred and continue forever in a vicious cycle. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches that the hatred human beings harbor for one another will cease forever when we finally abandon it. The Lotus Sutra goes a step further by teaching a proactive way of coping with hatred by transforming it into gratitude. Some may think that this is very difficult for an ordinary person to do. That is precisely why the Buddha emphasized the importance of this teaching with the following words, which I quote directly from the sutra. "If, in the future, there are good sons and good daughters who hear this Devadatta chapter of the wondrous Dharma Flower Sutra, and believe and revere it with pure hearts and without doubt, then they will not fall into the realms of hell's hungry spirits or beasts. They will be born into the presence of the Buddhas of the 10 directions. Wherever they are born, they will always hear this sutra. If they are born among humans and heavenly beings, they will enjoy marvelous delight. If they are born into the presence of Buddhas, they will be born from lotus flowers." In other words, if any man or woman in the ages following the passing of Shakyamuni Buddha listen receptively with a pure heart to the teachings of the Devadatta chapter of the Lotus Sutra, feel gratitude for it, and trust it without any doubt, they will not be reborn in the realms of hell's hungry spirits or beasts, nor will they experience the negative emotional states associated with these realms. Wherever they are reborn, they will always be born in the presence of one of the Buddhas of the universe, and they will also be able to encounter this supreme teaching. If they are born in the human or heavenly realms, they will always enjoy the true pleasure that is joy in the Dharma. If they are born in the presence of a Buddha, while still ordinary people, they will be able to draw near to the realms of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is just how much the teachings of this chapter matter to the lives we lead. Seeing that the Buddha has finished his assurance of Buddhahood for Devadatta, a Bodhisattva attendant of the Tathagata Abundant Treasures, named Accumulation of Wisdom, says to Abundant Treasures, "Let's return to our own land." But Shakyamuni Buddha responds to Accumulation of Wisdom, "I have a disciple named Manjushri who is an outstanding Bodhisattva. Why not return to your own land after meeting him and discussing the wondrous Dharma with him for just a while?" Just as Shakyamuni Buddha says this, Manjushri springs up from the ocean, accompanied by many attendant bodhisattvas, and answering a question posed by Accumulation of Wisdom, he recounts how he taught and transformed many living beings at the undersea palace of the Dragon King. When Accumulation of Wisdom praises Manjushri's accomplishment in verse, Manjushri responds, "No, I am not that praiseworthy. While under the sea, I simply taught the wondrous Dharma Flower Sutra and nothing else. I, myself, have a long way to go before I attain such greatness. By the way, There is something even more delightful that I have to tell you." Then Manjushri recounts how the 8-year-old daughter of the Dragon King Sagara attained awakening when he taught her the Lotus Sutra. He then proceeds at great length to extol the greatness of the Dragon Girl. Hearing this, the Bodhisattva accumulation of wisdom counters, "I have seen how Shakyamuni Buddha spent innumerable kalpas accumulating different and ascetic practices in ceaseless pursuit of the Bodhisattva way. I have also observed the great pains the Buddha took to attain awakening. Wherever one looks in our system of 3,000 great thousand-fold worlds, there is not a single spot, not even one as small as a mustard seed, where Shakyamuni has not laid down his body and sacrificed his life, practicing for the sake of living beings. Only after this did he finally become a Buddha. It is unbelievable that a small girl like the daughter of the Dragon King could attain perfect awakening in hardly any time at all. Before accumulation of wisdom has even finished speaking, the daughter of the Dragon King suddenly appears before them. Bowing reverently at the feet of the Buddha, she then withdraws to one side, offers lines of verse praising the virtues of the Buddha, and says with absolute certainty, "I am sure of my achievement of awakening. Only the Buddha, who knows this well, can bear witness. I will liberate living beings from suffering through the teaching of the great vehicle." But not everyone is convinced. Next, Shariputra challenges her assertion. "You say that you attained the unsurpassable way in hardly any time at all, but I just cannot believe that." He then goes on to list several reasons why a woman cannot attain Buddhahood. As soon as Shariputra says this, the Dragon Girl takes out a precious pearl from inside her robe and presents it to the world-honored one, who receives it immediately. The Buddha's instantaneous acceptance of her pearl is proof that he recognized her attainment of Buddhahood. The Dragon Girl then turns to Shariputra and asks, "The world-honored one accepted the pearl that I offered. Didn't it happen quickly?" Shariputra answers that it did indeed happen very quickly, to which the Dragon Girl quips, "Now use your transcendent powers to watch me attain Buddhahood even more quickly." With that, the entire assembly witnesses her instantly take on the appearance of a male, accomplish all the various bodhisattva practices, and then travel straight away to the domain pure and clean in the southern quarter, where she assumes the body of a Buddha, possessed of the 32 marks and 80 kinds of beautiful features, and universally proclaims the wondrous Dharma for all living beings. Women's attainment of Buddhahood. The Bodhisattvas, Shravakas, heavenly beings, dragons, and 8 classes of guardians, and human and non-human beings in the Saha world, all watch from afar as the Dragon Girl attains Buddhahood and teaches the Dharma to all human and heavenly beings assembled in the domain pure and clean. With their own eyes, all see the results of wholeheartedly believing the Lotus Sutra. Consequently, they are filled with joy and make gestures expressing their reverence to the Dragon Girl from a great distance. The knowledge that women can attain Buddhahood causes innumerable people to attain non-regression, the stage at which one does not retreat in one's faith. They gain the confidence that they will surely become Buddhas, and as many as 3,000 living beings receive assurances of Buddhahood. The Bodhisattva accumulation of wisdom, Shariputra, and all the others in the assembly are left utterly speechless by what they have seen, which profoundly increases their humble acceptance and belief in the great power of the Buddha's teachings. The Devadatta chapter ends with this scene. Women today may feel dissatisfied that the Dragon Girl becomes a Buddha only after suddenly transforming into a male. But the Buddhahood of women was expressed in this way because of the prevailing thought about women in ancient India, as discussed above. The Dragon Girl's ability to instantaneously transform into a male actually indicates the complete transcendence of gender distinction. Shakyamuni Buddha asserted that not only human beings, but even animals, birds, insects, and plants possess Buddha nature. So how could there be distinctions between men and women? It is not possible. In the eyes of the Buddha, all living beings are equal, something we should never misunderstand.